Never again can somebody who roots for the Dallas Cowboys, the Washington Redskins, or the New York Giants tell you a Philadelphia Eagles fan, give you that age-old quote that lasted 51 years and 364 days, or however long it's been since Super Bowl I. Hey man, how many rings you got? Because at this point, it doesn't matter. At this point, you can confidently say, you could stick your chest out from this day, well, actually from last Sunday, all the way up to the end of Super Bowl 53, and when they ask you how many rings do you have, you can confidently say the most recent one. Because as you're all aware, unless you're living under a rock, the Philadelphia Eagles won Super Bowl 52, knocking off the greatest quarterback to ever play the game. Maybe the greatest coach of all time. A guy that has more playoff victories than Nick Foles has career victories. A guy that has more Super Bowl rings by himself than any team in the NFL except 3. That is unbelievable. Welcome into Trust the Podcast, episode 4. I'm your host, Tyler Zulli, who is humbly and very graciously saying thank you for tuning back in to this post-Super Bowl 52 episode, an episode where you could say, wherever you want to leave a comment on Twitter, on YouTube, on the post itself, Tyler, you were wrong. Because I will happily reply to every single one of you that says, Tyler, you picked the Patriots to win the game. Shame on you. Ring your bells. Walk me down the streets and parade me as if I had done something seriously wrong. Because I took the New England Patriots to win Super Bowl 52. As objectively as I possibly could, I took the Patriots to win the Super Bowl. And as I said last week, prior to the game being played, I am so thankful that I am wrong. I don't know what your sense was or your emotions were after the final play, when the ball that flicked off Tom Brady's wrist seemed to be in the air for eternity and seemed to bounce off 7 different hands on the way to hitting the turf shy of Julian Edelman's diving hands. Or excuse me, Danny Amendola's diving hands. I don't know what your raw emotions were that split second afterwards. And I wish that we had the capability to take your reactions and take your phone calls. And that's the only downside of doing a podcast like this, is I cannot get your raw emotion. And now we're a couple of days after the game. We're a couple of days after the parade. And again, the downside of having a podcast is it's not a live reaction. And a recording of a podcast is only as good as the time frame in which it can be recorded. And because of work and because of other obligations, I wasn't able to get to it until today. So I'm sorry for the delay, and I'm sorry that we cannot take your reactions. But what I would like to do before I get into anything, and if you're not a big football fan, if you're looking for Sixers hoops, if you're looking for some spring training talk, if you're looking for Philadelphia Flyers hockey, if you're looking for soccer or anything among those sports or more, well, then you may not want to tune into this podcast, because for this week, and this being the last week, it will be all Eagles for the entire hour, because we have so much to break down. And in the first half an hour, I would like to get to just the emotional side of things, what this week has been in terms of what it means to Philadelphia, what it means to all Eagles fans who are throughout the world, and we know that there are a ton of them. And then in the second half hour, I'd really like to break down the game itself, go into the X's and O's, and finish up this Cinderella season that has been, that ended with your Philadelphia Eagles being Super Bowl 52 champs, riding the back of a backup quarterback, riding the back of a head coach in his second year who was criticized beyond belief for his play calling and his decision-making in a 7-9 season a year ago. who was criticized in Week 2 for going for it on a 4th and 8 against the Kansas City Chiefs. And we'll get into all of that in a little bit. But right now, what I want to focus on is raw emotion. Because in the industry which I work in, we oftentimes have to separate ourselves from true raw emotion. When you're a writer, you cannot subjectively write we, us, the Eagles, as being a part of the team that you cover. Because you're simply not. You're not a fan when you're a writer or a journalist. You are strictly a writer. So when you guys read me, you read Liam, you read all of our great coverage from the Flyers, you read Jamie, whoever you want to read on Philly Sports Network, and I urge you to read as much as you can because there's some great content out there. When you read our writing, we are objective journalists, and we don't get the freedom to talk about the team in a way that a fan would. We're breaking down X's and O's. We're breaking down certain plays. We're breaking down free agent signings and the like. But when you get an outlet like this, a podcast, when you get a radio show, you get the chance to really talk about your emotions as a fan because you're not subject to subjectivity, subject to objectivity. You can be a true Eagles fan, and that's really what I want to do here today. Because I worked the entirety of Super Bowl 52 at the radio station that I work for. And I would not have traded that for the world. Because I'm going to do a little touting and pounding my chest a little bit. There were 4 men, and I say men because it was all men, but 4 people who were on the air when the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl for the first time in franchise history. And I was one of them. And I will never be not thankful for that opportunity. But at the same time, it kind of forced me to be broadcaster Tyler and not fan Tyler. We cheered on air. We took phone calls that said, they were reacting to the game. They were thrilled with how things were going. It was a nail-biting back-and-forth game that we all expected. And remember, when I made the last podcast, I said it would be close. I did take the Patriots, and you can stone me for that one, but I did say it would be a close game either way. But it was a lot of fun, but it was work. So when the clock hit 0, we got off the air, and I went and hugged my co-host, and I went and hugged another guy who was coming on for a post-game show because we all were celebrating an Eagles victory, a Super Bowl Eagles victory that had never happened before. And for me, it really didn't sink in until after I had left the building. Because we had, like I said, we had cheered on air. We took phone calls with taking the Eagles chants, people singing the Eagles fight songs, clearly intoxicated, but having a time of their lives. Because they sat and watched the game with their loved ones, with their best friends, with the guys and girls that they've gone to every Eagles game with or watched every Eagles game with since 1980, since 2004, since 1960. And you got to be a fan and react to that. But when I got off the air and I got done doing, hugging everybody in the building, and I went to my car, and I was cool, calm, and collected. I was excited, obviously, but I was ramped up and ready to go. I was so totally excited. I got in my car, I closed the door, and I went to put the key in the ignition. And I couldn't turn the key to start the car because I had to sit there for a second and just reflect on what had just happened. And when I really had the chance to be Tyler the fan instead of Tyler the writer or Tyler the broadcaster, I had a chance to sit there and just be an Eagles fan. I couldn't turn the car on because tears started streaming down my face. You would have thought if you were a passerby walking behind my car or in front of my car, either getting into the building in which our station's located or just walking by to get to the bus stop or whatever, you would have thought I was bawling my eyes out for no reason in the car, if it were any other day. But I had to sit and reflect, and that's really when the emotions hit me. I got choked up, and tears just streamed down my face. Because it was something that, although, like I said, I've distanced myself in the past few years by being a sports journalist and a writer and a broadcaster, so I'm not just that raw fan anymore because I have a tie to being a part of the media. This was the one opportunity by myself to just be a fan. And when you put 4 hours every single Sunday or Monday night or Thursday night from the time that you can sing the Eagles fight song at 3 years old, 2 years old, to the time that the Philadelphia Eagles watch this last second tick off the clock and win Super Bowl 52, for me it was 24 years in the making. My father had to wait into his 50s. There were grandfathers who had to wait into their 80s. You know, and they saw Super Bowl or the NFL championship in 1960. Some have even seen the championships from 48 and 49. And if you waited that long, you got to see 48, 49, and 60. And when they officially, quote-unquote, changed the format to Super Bowl, you waited from the time 1948 rolled around to 2017, actually 2018. So you're talking almost 70 full years. You're into the 70th year. Even if you were 10 or 12, you're now up into your 80s. You waited a long time for this. And that's why I said it last week when I said, this is for everybody in this city. This means more than a football game to this city. This is for your uncle, your cousin, your brother, your sister, your mom, your grandmom, your father, your grandfather, your best friend who didn't make it to this point, who passed before this time happened. This is also for all of us who put 4 hours every Sunday of our lives from September till the last time the Eagles take the field, whether that be in early January, late January, or in this case, the last game of the year in early February. You put 4 hours of your life every single week into this team. You cry when this team loses. You cheer when this team wins. You're more critical of your own team than you are of any other team in the league. And assuredly, I can guarantee you I'm one of those people that when we look at X's and O's, and I don't have this extensive football knowledge like I do a baseball knowledge, but I know the game well enough to say, this guy was in the wrong spot, this guy did this, he stinks, blah, blah, blah. We all do it. But you live and die vicariously through the Eagles' success. Mondays, when you wake up for work on a Monday after a Super Bowl win, after an Eagles win, are a little bit easier. People are a little bit more friendly in the office at 9 a.m. Monday morning after the Eagles just won a game. After the Eagles just beat the Cowboys on Sunday night, putting up 30-plus points. Now, we always talk about imagine what a Super Bowl parade would be like. Imagine what the Monday after a Super Bowl victory would be like for Philadelphia Eagles fans in Philadelphia, in Bucks County, Berks County, Delaware County, Central and Southern Jersey, Upper Delaware, everybody that's an in-plant in Maryland, Virginia, Florida, Colorado, California, North Dakota, Thailand. We had a guy at the station call in from Thailand, said that kickoff where he was 6:30 Monday morning his time. But he was going to watch. He took off work that Monday because the Philadelphia Eagles were playing in the Super Bowl. And he was going to have a party just like it was 6:30 p.m. on Eastern Standard Time where we are here in Philadelphia. It means so much more to a town that never has experienced Super Bowl ecstasy. Pure, unadulterated elation had been eluding Philadelphia Eagles fans for 51 years, where you watch the Dallas Cowboys win Super Bowls. You watched the Washington Redskins win Super Bowls. You watched the New York Giants win Super Bowls. You watched Bill Belichick and Tom Brady become a dynasty and win Super Bowls, beating your team once in the process. You suffered through how many rings does your team have? From Philadelphians who were born and raised in West Philly, in Newtown, in wherever in the surrounding suburbs or in Philly itself, who grew up Cowboys fans because they were good at the time, and they'll tell you, nah, man, it was just because my dad was a Cowboys fan. My great-uncle's cousin's dog was a Cowboys fan. Now, let's be real. You guys weren't Cowboys fans because of anybody's ex-brother-in-law's dog's scratching post like the Cowboys. You like the Cowboys because when you grew up in the 70s or you grew up in the 90s, they were good, and the Eagles stunk. So you said, I want to root for a good team. Now, this Super Bowl is for you people out there, you Philadelphia Eagles fans, who, when you went to work on Monday, put up a couple of fingers to your Dallas Cowboy brethren, to your New York Giants brethren, to your Washington Redskins brethren, and you said, this is our week, this is our year, and by the way, when our Philadelphia Eagles and our Philadelphia Eagles front office go down to your Dallas Cowboys city, which, by the way, you've probably never been, but you root for the Cowboys for some ridiculous reason. When our Philadelphia Eagles front office goes down to Dallas in 3 months' time, and they start announcing picks for the NFL draft, whether the Eagles take the pick or don't, and I've got a couple ideas on that in which I don't think they're going to stay at 32, because of needs and whatnot. But whether they take the pick or not, at some point, Roger Goodell is going to have to take the podium and say, with the 32nd pick, the 2017 Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles are on the clock. And they're going to get booed. And you know what? Bring on the boo birds. Because this is your time, Philadelphia. This is your time to celebrate something that has eluded you for the last 51 years. 1960 does not have to be the threshold anymore. The what-ifs of 2004, the what-ifs of 1980, the what-if Randall Cunningham didn't get hurt on the first game of the season in the early 90s, that 91 team probably could have made a run to the Super Bowl. That's all anybody talked about. That's what I grew up on. Stories of how good that late 80s, early 90s defense was. How good Reggie was. How good Jerome Brown was. How good the secondary was and how they used to just pop guys. But they didn't have an offense. And maybe if Randall didn't get hurt that 1 year, they would have been okay. How in 1980, they went into the Super Bowl as favorites and did not win. How in 2004, Donovan McNabb threw up in the huddle. Or how L.J. Smith didn't catch a pass that went off his hands and got picked off by Rodney Harrison. How the Patriots outplayed them and Bill Belichick outcoached Andy Reid in 2004. How we talk about the Fog Bowl. How we talk about any little detail of what you want to discuss. How Ricky Manning is still running down the sideline. How Rondé Barber is still running down the sideline from the 02 and 03 NFC title games. Whatever you want to talk about, whatever was your what-if moment, you don't have to talk about your what-if moment anymore. Because now you can say unequivocally the Philadelphia Eagles have a Super Bowl ring. And they are the current and defending Super Bowl champions until someone knocks them off the pedestal next February, the one after that, whatever it may be. If the Eagles win no games next year, they're still the defending Super Bowl champions. And they've also put themselves in a good spot to maybe get back to one. Does it have to be next year? Certainly not. But could it be? It's not out of the realm of possibility. Let's take a quick break. This one ran a little bit long, but as you can tell, my emotions got fired up a little bit. Let's take a quick break. On the other side, I want to talk about the parade. Because the parade was an absolute nightmare in the best way possible. It was logistically poorly planned, but it worked out so well. And I want to get to the parade, and then in the last half an hour, like I said, we'll really break down the game. We'll talk about the Philly special. We'll talk about Doug Peterson and what kind of tremendous confidence he not only has in Nick Foles, but he has in himself, apparently. We'll get to all that and much more on the other side. We'll step aside for just a moment. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be right back. This is Trust the Podcast. Thanks for coming back with us on Trust the Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Zulli. You can find us on a plethora of outlets. If you've just found us on one, take a look at all the others. You can find us on phillysportsnetwork.com. That is, of course, our primary site where you'll not only find this podcast, but also some great writing as well across the spectrum from the MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, MLS, and far much more that you can find on phillysportsnetwork.com. Also, you can find us on YouTube if you have not done so yet. Give us a subscribe, a like, and a comment, and let us know what you think about this podcast so far. And all the other videos that we put up to this point, our editor-in-chief, our main man, our go-to guy, Liam Jenkins, does a lot of film room breakdown. I'm sure if you've seen us on YouTube already to this point, you've seen him bust his butt over the last 2 weeks to really get some great content out there, breaking down the play of Halapuli Vaitai, breaking down the play of Nick Foles, breaking down the play of every Eagle you could possibly imagine. It's there on YouTube. So thanks so much for joining us on whichever outlet you have chosen to find us on. And let's get back to this Super Bowl 52 victory. I want to get into the parade a little bit because, like I said before we went into the break, and I teased it a little bit, this was such a glorious nightmare. And what I mean by that is it was, if you look at it, all of the people that were in Philadelphia, whether you're from Philly, you're from the outskirts of Philly, or you drove and flew in. We've heard from people from Virginia flying or driving in, people from Chicago flying in, people who live in California flying in. In fact, a good buddy of mine flew in from California. He's out there interning and working, and he's going to have an amazing career in the sports industry when his collegiate career is over. So he came in for the parade. And that's just what Philadelphians do. When something like this happens, if you remember going back to the 2008 Phillies parade, it was wild. It was a great time. We were all down there. Anybody and everybody was down there at the parade. But something about this 2017-18 Eagles parade made the 2008 Phillies parade pale in comparison. Whether it was the sheer number of people, and they're not releasing a number of people, however many people were actually at the parade, they won't release that number for a while. My guess is somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million people. Just an estimate. Obviously, the people that have those kind of degrees that are a lot smarter than me will give you a more well-rounded number if you ask. Like we said, they're probably not going to release those numbers to the public just yet. You'll see them a little bit down the line. But if it was the sheer numbers, if it was just the utter elation that was a first Super Bowl title. You know, you go back to 2008, and the Phillies had won the World Series in 1980. And obviously, I was not alive for the 1980 parade. I don't know what it was like. The older generation, you know, my parents' generation and above, will remember the 80 parade. So you guys remember what that was like. But for my generation, we don't obviously remember the 1980 parade. But 2008 was the second. And yes, of course, it was the first championship in Philadelphia since 1983, but it was the second Phillies parade. The Flyers' second parade was not as big as the first. The Sixers, I would imagine a Sixers parade in this town would draw a lot of people because of the trusting the process and all that, but it will still pale in comparison to what this week held, what this Philadelphia Eagles parade held. Whether you were there or you watched it on TV, you were a part of it in some way. I don't know anybody that said, nah, I didn't watch it. No, I wasn't there. No, I didn't watch highlights of it. No, Jason Kelce wasn't the greatest speech of all time. And we'll get to that in a second because I've got I've got something to say about that one. But this parade meant something more to the city of Philadelphia. And I would imagine that the 2001 parade for the New England Patriots, although Boston is a total baseball town through and through, so maybe that's not a good example. If you find another city who is football first, you take a team like, let's say, Green Bay, who only has one football team, or you take a team that is a city that's football first, whatever it may be. You find your football first city and their first parade. I'd like to see how the numbers shake up. Maybe not Green Bay's a great example because they won Super Bowls 1 and 2, and just the sheer number of people and population was lower. But I'd like to see comparatively how those numbers shake up and what the outcome looked like for teams that comparatively won their first Super Bowl title after a long, elongated wait. The Baltimore Ravens don't count because they won, less than 10 years into their existence. So, but if you find a team or a city that is football first and you can kind of go back and trace their numbers for their first Super Bowl parade, I'd be interested to see what you could find. Leave us a comment on the YouTube page or on our website itself at phillysportsnetwork.com and just let us know. Because this, to me, was all-encompassing. People were bringing ashes of past loved ones to the parade, whether it was to be at the parade with the person that they watched every Eagles game with, whether it was to spread the ashes of their loved one at the Eagles parade as per their loved one's request, whatever it may be, this one was just a notch up. And the crowds were crazy, but at no point did I ever see anything that was utterly destructive. You had a couple of knuckleheads the night of the Super Bowl win. The guy that ate the horse poop and people standing on top of the Ritz-Carlton awning until it collapsed, people bringing down some light post. And those people are not the kind of fans that we associate with. The kind of fans that I want to associate with are the kind of fans that were out at the parade at 5 a.m. enjoying their time. They took a day off. They were having a couple of beers. They were just enjoying time as it was coming because they knew the significance of this parade. They weren't rowdy. They weren't destructive. They climbed trees to get a better view, but they weren't being awfully destructive in any means. The kind of person that you could walk up to, and I don't know if you've seen this story on social media, but this one I thought was pretty neat. I mentioned people bringing their urns of loved ones to the parade to see the parade with the person that they love. Well, a guy had surfaced, a picture of him had surfaced on social media that he had the ashes of his former wife, the ashes of his deceased wife, who watched every game with him religiously for years. And he brought her to the parade to celebrate with the woman that not only he loved, but loved the Eagles with. And a couple of guys across the street saw what was going on, chucked a beer across the barricades to him. He caught it, looked up. They all put their beers up in celebration and just said, "Hey man, we're with you. Because this one's for you and it's for her, and do with this beer as you will." Because something brought everybody in this city together. The rich, the poor, the black, the white, the gay, the straight. It didn't matter what your background was, what your religion was, what your ethnicity was, what your social status was, because everybody was just there being Eagles fans. And that is how we should live every single day of our lives. And unfortunately, it does not work that way. But for a 12-hour period, that's how life was. And that's how life should be every day. Because everybody was in a good mood, elated that their Eagles had just won the Super Bowl, looking at the Lombardi Trophy in person for the first time, seeing their favorite players go up and down Broad and to the Art Museum, interacting with the fans, having a couple of drinks with the fans, signing autographs, taking pictures, and everybody was just in unison. Because again, you can't stress this enough. This one meant more to this city than anything ever will in sports again. Super Bowl Sunday, February 4th, 2018, was the most important sports moment in Philadelphia history. 2008 was fun. I'm sure 1980 was fun. I'm sure 1983 was fun for the Sixers. 74-75 was probably fun for the Flyers. But this town will, and always will be a Philadelphia Eagles town first. And for the Eagles to win their first after 52 years, that's why this parade was so special. Now, to get away from the parade a little bit and to move on to what I think everybody's going to be talking about for quite a long time is the new mayor of Philadelphia, the de facto mayor of Philadelphia, number 62, Senator Jason Kelce. Because Jason Kelce delivered one of the most passionate speeches I've ever seen. And I'm sure you've seen the pictures and the memes by now on Facebook and Twitter and all that, where it was a picture of Chase Utley where it said, "I dropped an F-bomb on national TV." And then it's just a picture of Kelce where it says, "Hold my beer." Because what Jason Kelce said, even if you were watching it on TV and only got a glimpse of it, or only got an earful of it because they were bleeping it out because they have to for FCC regulation purposes, I'm sure NBC 10 in Philadelphia would have loved to have run the whole speech in its entirety if they could, because it would have made for great TV. But FCC regulations don't allow for that, so they had to bleep Jason Kelce out. But at this point, everybody has heard the unedited version of Jason Kelce's speech. And what Jason Kelce said resonated to every single Philadelphian that was at the parade, watching the parade, or unable to attend the parade because of work, school, whatever. Because Jason Kelce said, we're the underdogs. And when underdogs don't get, and when dogs don't eat, they get hungry. And they weren't fed any kind of good vibes. They weren't fed any kind of respect throughout the entire season. Sure, they were number one in the polls, but they were number one in the polls because they had to be. Because they were 10-1. They were 12-2. They had to be number one. And immediately after Carson Wentz went down, that number dropped. They were picked to be underdogs in the divisional round against Atlanta, in the conference title game against Minnesota, and the Super Bowl against the New England Patriots. There was no respect going around. And the national pundits gave them no love. Mike Lombardi roasted Doug Peterson, saying he was the least qualified coach that he had ever seen. And I got to give Mike Lombardi some credit, because he tweeted after what Jason Kelce said and said, I deserved what Jason Kelce said. I was wrong about the Eagles and I was wrong about Doug Peterson. The only one that had any kind of idea that the Eagles were this good, other than the Eagles and us, was Kyle Brandt. And that man should have gotten his own float, because he was the only one that stuck with them when times got rough. But what Jason Kelce said resonated to me, because as a broadcaster and a writer, it is my job to relay the news of what I believe and what I'm writing about to you as a listener and a reader. And while I'm not an Eagles writer for Philly Sports Network, I have a good knowledge of the team. We talk about them all the time. I had some qualms about the guys on this roster. I had some major qualms prior to the season about Zach Ertz. I said he didn't come up clutch. He only picked up yards and touchdowns when the games didn't matter. I mean, if you go back and look at his numbers, statistically he's been great. But go back and look at the games in which he was great. It was against the Cowboys in the last week of the year last year. It was when the Eagles were statistically eliminated. It was in week 2. So I had my issues with Zach Ertz. I had my issues with Doug Peterson. I had my issues with Torrey Smith. I still have my issues with Ronald Darby, but we'll let them calm down for now, because the Eagles are Super Bowl champions. I relayed that message to everybody I could, because it was my job to do so. And just like everybody that's in the media, we've allowed for a mea culpa, and I hope the players have allowed for a mea culpa, of good tidings and ill will being cast aside because this team defied the odds and won the Super Bowl. Jason Kelce went along and said, Jason Kelce is too small. Jason Peters is done. Nick Foles can't do it. He's a career backup. Darren Sproles is out. This running back core stinks. Torrey Smith can't catch. Zach Ertz can't catch when it matters. Can't stay healthy. And they all proved it wrong. Torrey Smith had some bad drops, but he also had some huge catches. If you go back to the first drive of the Super Bowl last week, Torrey Smith made an unbelievable adjustment on the ball to pick up a first down on 3rd and 8. Ball was thrown behind him, and he made a great job going back to the ball. Zach Ertz with a singular effort to get into the end zone when it mattered most, scoring the go-ahead touchdown. Doesn't get any bigger than that. And we talked about, I talked about how he didn't perform in big game situations. Doesn't get any bigger than that. Every single one of those guys stepped up at the crucial time. Will they ever win a Super Bowl again? I don't know. But they sure as the day is long, stifled the pessimism of myself and of every single one that watched this team and covered this team, at least for the moment, saying that we are good enough and we did it. Nick Foles went to Disney because he was the Super Bowl MVP. The first guy in NFL history, by the way, to catch and throw a touchdown in a Super Bowl. And we'll get to Philly or Philly Special or whatever you want to call it on the other side. We'll talk about, like I said, we'll break down the X's and O's. But as we wrap up this segment, all we really have to say about this team is they had resiliency beyond belief. For a lack of better wording, Doug Peterson had some of the biggest testicular fortitude I've ever seen in my life. To go for it, not only to go for it on 4th and 1 at the goal line as time was set to expire, not only to go for it on 4th and 1 as time is set to expire, and I said that twice for a reason, to let that sink in and melt into your brain, but to run a trick play. To run a trick play. Allow that all to sink in if you haven't yet. If you just look at the Philly Special and say, wow, that was a great design play. Allow it to sink in that in the biggest stage, at the biggest moment of the time, now obviously the second half was precedent, but at the biggest stage at that time, Doug Peterson was unabashed and unafraid to go for it on 4th and 1 with a trick play. Not many guys are willing to do that. And that's why Doug Peterson had the stones to stand toe-to-toe with Bill Belichick and say, you ran a trick play, I'm going to one-up you. Bill Belichick, the guy that makes everybody afraid to coach against them, to coach scared. Doug Marrone, coach scared. Pete Carroll, coach scared. Ron Rivera, coach scared. I know Ron Rivera coached against the Broncos, but Ron Rivera coached scared, I should say, in a regular season game. I apologize. You know who didn't coach scared this year? Doug Peterson and Adam Gase. One won a meaningless Monday night game. The other won the Super Bowl. That's the difference between Doug Peterson and Andy Reid. Doug Peterson is willing to go toe-to-toe with anybody and not coach scared. Let's step aside for another moment. We'll take another quick break. On the other side, we will break down this game X's and O's style. We'll get into some details, stats, highlights, what made this game what it was, and what made this game one of the better Super Bowl games in recent history, and what led to the Philadelphia Eagles being Super Bowl 52 champions. Thanks for hanging in with us. We'll be right back on Trust the Process. All right, so I'm calling a little bit of a last-minute audible here. I had segued multiple times that we were going to break down this game, break down this Super Bowl winning game, a 41-33 victory over the New England Patriots. However, because of a delay in this production of the podcast, because of some personal matters that I had to attend to, and a kind of a split in recording sessions in which the first 2 segments were recorded a few days prior to this last third segment, and just some personal things that I needed to deal with. This episode has been delayed far long enough, so I'm calling a little bit of an audible here on Trust the Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Zulli. Thanks so much for joining me for this final segment. I was going to break down the game statistically like I had for the Minnesota game and like I had for the Atlanta game. However, I really think at this point, you guys have gotten a grasp on the game. I think you've probably watched it 3, 4, 5 times already, just like I have. You watched it on Super Bowl Sunday night emotionally, and then maybe a few days later you went back and watched it, and you said, I'm going to watch this game and really kind of dissect this game like I do normal games. But because it was the Super Bowl, I was emotionally more invested. Therefore, I didn't get a chance to really go into the ins and outs of the games. But I'm under the assumption at this point that many of you have watched this game a second time, a third time, a fourth time like I have. I think I've watched the game in its entirety 3 times now, and in bits and pieces probably a fourth and a fifth time. So I'm going to stay away from the statistical side of things, kind of the bogged down, boring stuff, because you guys know what happened. You know that the Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions. You know that Tom Brady played maybe the best game in Super Bowl history, and his team was still not good enough because the Eagles came up with the biggest play of the game when it mattered the most. So I'm going to move away from the Super Bowl and start to talk about the offseason. Because at some point, we've got to wrap our deliriously happy heads around the fact that 2018's season is technically right around the corner. In 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time, free agency is going to open. The draft is in 2 months. Because we are all still in a Super Bowl frenzy. I still find myself on I guess you might call it Cloud 7. Because I'm not necessarily on Cloud 9 anymore. I'm not in that jubilant state that I was for Super Bowl Sunday and the week and a half afterwards, because life moves on. But I'm still ecstatic about the Eagles being Super Bowl champions. And I'm still ecstatic about Jason Kelce's speech at the parade. And I'm still ecstatic about the fact that I'm pretty certain that Jason Kelce is going to be the WWE manager for Chris Long and Lane Johnson when their NFL careers are over. And they're going to be a lot of fun in that industry if that's the case. But what I really want to get to today is the topic that a lot of people have been talking about, and that's Nick Foles. And it's, what do you do with Nick Foles? Because for the first time in Philadelphia Eagles franchise history, you have a guy that can walk into the NovaCare complex, that can walk into Lincoln Financial Field, that can walk around Philadelphia, who is labeled Super Bowl MVP. And with Super Bowl MVP comes a lot of caveats. It comes, Nick Foles, I don't know if he drinks. I know he's a Christian man, so he may not. If he does, he'll never buy a drink again when he's out on the town in his life. It buys a lot of love for Nick Foles, where there was very little 7 weeks ago. You guys remember the Oakland Raiders game? He was terrible. You guys remember the Dallas Cowboys game and the little bit that he played? Awful. Had 2 good throws, 3 bad throws. And then all of a sudden, he comes and plays a decent game against Atlanta, good enough for them to win 15-10, utterly annihilates the Minnesota Vikings and the quote-unquote number 1 defense in the league, and then goes and beats the greatest quarterback of all time in his own game. Because what did we talk about all week leading up to Super Bowl 52? Well, the only thing we don't want to happen is the Eagles to get into a shootout with the Patriots. Because Nick Foles won't beat Tom Brady. Nick Foles isn't as good as Tom Brady. We know that. We're not denying that here in Philadelphia. But what we were saying was, we don't want Nick Foles to have to match score for score with Tom Brady. And not only did he do that, he out-surpassed him. He surpassed him in points. May not have outplayed him on the field, because Tom Brady, like I said, may have had the best Super Bowl performance ever. But he surpassed him where it mattered most. I don't care that he threw less yards, threw less touchdowns, had less completions, whatever the case may be. At the end of the day, they won the game, and that's all that matters to me. But now you've got this situation with a backup quarterback who's set to make a decent sum of money for backup quarterback standards, and a recovering starting quarterback who may or may not be ready in time for the first game of the year, with likely zero preseason work. So what do you do with Nick Foles? Now, all over sports media in Philadelphia over the last couple of weeks, what we've seen was what is the minimum threshold to deal Nick Foles? Do you deal Nick Foles? Do the Eagles owe it to Nick Foles to keep him / trade him to a team where he could be a starter? Let's answer all three of those questions. Let's answer them in reverse order, though. Do the Eagles owe it to Nick Foles to trade him to a team, should he so choose, that would make him a starting quarterback? Do the Eagles owe it to Nick Foles to make him their starting quarterback to begin the year? Do the Eagles owe it to Nick Foles to keep him on the roster? And the answer is no. The answer is no. What Nick Foles did for this franchise will never be forgotten. It will never be downplayed. It will never be downtrodden. And it will never, ever, ever leave the minds of Philadelphia Eagles fans. Especially because of the fact that they ran a trick play where he caught a touchdown pass. The fact that he threw a beautiful ball to Corey Clement, who was draped by 3 defenders to throw for a touchdown. He threw a beautiful ball to Alshon Jeffrey for a touchdown. What Nick Foles did for this city is more than football. We talked about that multiple times. But at the end of the day, the NFL, much like your job, much like my job, is a business. And for the Eagles to succeed, and they feel that trading Nick Foles gives them the best chance to succeed, then you don't owe the guy anything. If the Philadelphia Eagles believe that the best chance to win in 2018 is with Nick Foles as either the first couple weeks starter to allow Carson Wentz to naturally recover, or as the backup to this football team for a quarterback that's coming off an ACL and MCL injury, that's fine either way. But whatever this team believes is the best course of action for them to get back to Super Bowl 53. We're not talking about rebuilding. We're not talking about, well, the Eagles are a couple of pieces away, and it would be great to see them win 9 or 10 games like we talked about this year. We're talking about going back to the Super Bowl after winning the Super Bowl. So whatever the Eagles feel is necessary to get back to Super Bowl 53 and go play in Houston next year, then that's what they need to do. And if that's trade Nick Foles, then I've got no issue with it. And if that's keep Nick Foles, I also have no issue with it. If you keep Nick Foles, you're looking at a salary cap situation that's a little bit different. And I'll get into that a little bit at the end if we have time. If not, we'll talk about it in the next couple of weeks. But let's move on to the next question. Again, do the Eagles owe Nick Foles anything to make him the starting quarterback? Absolutely not. You play to win the game. In the beautifully spoken words that will never be forgotten in football mantra, you play to win the game. And if Carson Wentz, and not if, when Carson Wentz provides you with the best chance to win a football game or win multiple football games, especially down the stretch, then you don't owe anything to Nick Foles to make him the quote-unquote starting quarterback because he won a Super Bowl. That would be like the Washington Redskins saying to Mark Rippon, hey, by the way, you're going to be the starter for the rest of your life. That would be like the Giants saying to Jeff Hostetler, yeah, I know we got this Hall of Fame guy, Phil Simms, but you won us a Super Bowl, so we're going to keep you around instead. Or we're going to keep you around as the starter as well as Phil Simms to be your backup. That sounds delusional because Phil Simms is a Hall of Famer. And that's the situation we find ourselves precariously perched in with Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. What Nick Foles did, we will never forget. I can't say that enough. But at the same side, on the same token, you cannot forget the fact that Carson Wentz is the best quarterback on the roster. And when healthy, provides you with the best chance to watch your Eagles play in Super Bowl 53 in February 2019. I know it's a long way away. We're 50 weeks away from the next Super Bowl. But when you've got a team that outplayed every single pundit's expectations and every single one of our expectations. Now, I know there are some of you outliers that said, well, I predicted the Eagles to be 12-4, and I was pretty much right. Good for you. But the people that logically thought about this and didn't pick the Eagles to go 12-4 every single season for the time that they were 6 till the time they're 56, let's think about this logically. The team was coming off a 7-9 season in which the fans were not content with Doug Peterson. Carson Wentz was good. He wasn't great. The Eagles really didn't have a reliable running game. They were relying on a Patriots cast-off, Wendell Smallwood, and a scat back in Darren Sproles. They didn't have a defense that we thought, my goodness, they're going to be the best. They had corners like Patrick Robinson, who were, I thought, cut himself from training camp. I didn't even know he was going to make a team, let alone this team, let alone stand out in the slot for this team. This team was not complete. And if you would have said this team might win 10, that's a fair assessment. I had 8. I thought a one-game uptick would have been a fair assessment for this team. But nobody had them going 13-3 other than those crazy guys that pick that every year. And if you're one of those crazy guys, congratulations. I guess a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then. So, good for you if you picked it. Most of us didn't. But now you temper expectations for 2018-2019. You have to start looking at, how does this team repeat? And this team repeats by what they feel is necessary to do with Nick Foles. They have a lot of tough decisions to make in the coming days, coming months. They have a tough decision with Brent Selleck. They have a tough decision with Trey Burton. They have a tough decision with Vinny Curry. Do they extend Brandon Graham? They have tough decisions to make with Jason Peters. They've got a lot of tough decisions to make. And not a lot of young players coming in because of the fact that they don't have a second or third round pick. Which is why, and I'll get to this as the draft gets closer, which is why the Eagles will likely trade out of 32. The likelihood of you seeing the Eagles make a pick on day one to end day one is very slim. But let's get back to this Nick Foles thing as we kind of wrap this show up. The final question that I asked is, what is the minimum threshold for you to trade Nick Foles? What are you comfortable with in getting in return for Nick Foles this season that would allow you to go into the regular season with an understanding that Carson Wentz may not be healthy to start week 1, and that it would be, at the current juncture, Nate Sudfeld as the starting quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles? Are you willing to give up that security blanket in Nick Foles, and what are you willing to give him up for? Because for me, there is only one answer to this question. And it's not 2019, and it's not future endeavors, and it's not players. There is one answer to this question, and one answer alone, that I am willing to give up Nick Foles for. And that is a 2018 first-round pick. That is it. And I know it's a lofty expectation, because Nick Foles is not a first-round talent. Nick Foles is not a first-round quarterback. Nick Foles doesn't deserve to be traded for a first-round pick on a normal circumstance. But now you're not looking and dealing with normal circumstances. Now you're dealing with a Super Bowl MVP quarterback, and that bumps his price tag up. Now you're looking at a quarterback who played well sustainably for 5 games. That lowers his price tag. So there are ifs and ends and buts and coulds and shoulds and woulds and everything that you could think of that factor in to Nick Foles' price tag. And for me, because of the security blanket that Nick Foles provides, I would not trade him for anything short of a first-round pick this year, because I need something that is going to be a product on the field immediately. Now, if you're going to get a top 5 pick for him, that's absurd to think, but if you are, you take it in a heartbeat. You can grab a bunch of good players up in the top 5, top 10. If you're going to get 26, 29, if you're going to get 29 for him, let's say the Jacksonville Jaguars want him at 29 for some odd reason. Do you make that move? Maybe. Maybe then you package 32 and 29 and try to move up. And you try to move up earlier into the first round, and then you're getting a bona fide starter. If the Arizona Cardinals come calling at 15 and say, hey, we'll give you 15 for Nick Foles, I'm in every single day of the week. Every single day of the week and twice on Sunday, you could sign me up for a 15th overall pick for Nick Foles. Because I'll tell you exactly who I'd want at 15 right now, and I'll do mock drafts as the draft gets closer, and things will change, and trades will be made, and guys will go up and down because of the combine. But if you're going to give me 15, I'm looking at Raekwon Smith all day long. All day long. Linebacker, good size, good speed, SEC backer, I'll take him every day of the week because he could be an immediate starter. I think talent-wise, he's an immediate starter. Does that necessarily mean that do you trade Nick Foles for a starting rookie linebacker? Are you comfortable with that? Because I am. I'm totally comfortable with trading Nick Foles for a starting linebacker. And I think you all would be too if you signed up for it. If you knew who you were getting, if it wasn't a draft pick, if you knew who you were getting as the starting middle linebacker or the starting outside linebacker, would you make the deal? Does it change the fact because it's a rookie and you don't know what you're going to get out of him? Does that change that fact? Because for me, it doesn't. I'm not taking a second or a third round pick to get a guy that's depth. I'll just keep Nick Foles and see what we can do with him. I shouldn't say we. I'm just speaking as if I were the Eagles GM, if I were Howie Roseman, if I were Doug Peterson, if I were Jeffrey Lurie. If I were in any of their shoes and a first-round pick got offered to me, I'm taking it every single day of the week. If I'm getting offered a second, a third, a fourth, some compensatory picks, I'm not taking it. I'm not taking anything less than a first-round pick for Nick Foles. Or a player of caliber of first-round talent that is not on a max deal yet. That's not on an expensive deal. Because the Eagles are strapped for cash as it is. So if I can trade $7-8 million, whatever it is that Nick Foles is set to make in 2018, and trade that for $2.5 million for the 15th overall pick, you've just saved yourself some money. If Brent Selleck decides he wants to retire, there's another $5 million off the table. You have to finagle this in such a way that the Eagles are going to make out in this and still stay under the cap. But to wrap things up here and conclude my incoherent rambling, if the Eagles don't get offered a first-round pick for Nick Foles, I think you keep him. And a first-round pick in 2018, this April's draft. I don't want anything for next April. I don't want anything for 2020. I don't want anything that is a Sam Bradford deal. And if you get a Sam Bradford deal, that's great, after you keep him. But I don't want anything that's not guaranteed. If you're going to offer me 15, I'm in. Arizona, I'm looking at you. Let's make a deal. Now, of course, I'm playing hypothetical as if I'm Howie Roseman and Doug Peterson and all the head execs and all that good stuff. But it's my logical thought process is I'm not taking anything less than a first-round pick for Nick Foles. But that's not why I get paid the big bucks. That's why I talk to you guys instead. And that's why nobody cares about my opinion. But anyway, let's wrap this thing up for the day. Thanks so much for listening into this edition of Trust the Podcast. If you liked it, go find us on our website at phillysportsnetwork.com, where you can find some great writers. We're adding and we're expanding and we're getting bigger and better and stronger. You're going to follow our Flyers team, which is probably our most consistent team of all of the writing cores that we have. Our Union team is expanding as the Union season gears up. Our Eagles coverage is always great. You can find everything that you need right on phillysportsnetwork.com. Find us on YouTube as well. Just put it in the search bar, Philly Sports Network. You'll find some great videos. You can listen to all of my previous podcasts if you like, some player breakdowns by Liam Jenkins and much more. You can find us on there, or just give us a Google search. You'll find us. You can follow us on Twitter. Good stuff. Good stuff all around. I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm tooting everybody else's horn that I work for. I am proud to be with those guys, and they put out some great work. So find us wherever you can, and thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for tuning in to this Trust the Podcast for this week and every week. I'll be back with you next week. We'll start getting into some spring training talk. We'll break down some Flyers hockey. Second half Sixers action. The Union gets started as well. We'll start to move away from the Eagles a little bit and make this more of an all-encompassing podcast as it is known as Trust the Podcast, and we'll talk a little bit of everything. So thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Tyler Zulli one final time for Trust the Podcast. Have a great week.